Yeah! Yeah, baby. All right. Just me, you, and Oprah today. So let's take a look at how the Enlightenment influenced the American Revolution on a very basic level. So let's kind of start out with a little mappy poo, and we're going to zoom in just so we have a nice view of the regions we're looking at. All right, so over here, we're going to box out Europe, and this is where the Enlightenment begins. Okay? It's going to eventually make its way over to the 13 colonies and even through to the Caribbean and Central and South America. But we're going to focus on this for the U.S. history course. So the question is, first off, what is the Enlightenment? What are some of the big ideas and people we need to know? And how did they influence our American Revolution? Okay, so let's zoom in over here. Just really quickly, we did some work looking at the New England colonies, the middle colonies, the southern colonies. And just to rehash, we see that in the New England colonies, we had New England town meetings. And one of the bigger colonies in the South considered was Virginia, and they had the House of Burgesses. These are both representative forms of government or self-government, so that's always a good term to know. All right, and getting there is influenced through some of this Enlightenment writing. So let's take a look at a quick timeline. Here we got a picture of me when I was back in high school. There I am, say hello. Hey guys, it's me, Mr. Malone. All right, let's zoom out. Stop fooling around, guys. Seriously, we gotta take this serious. All right, let's zoom out. We're gonna take a look. So between basically the 1600s, all right, right around to the mid-18th century is the Enlightenment period. Okay, so these ideas are going to influence our Declaration of Independence. Okay, then we have our first form of national government for all of the colonies coming together into a nation, which are the Articles of Confederation. And we'll learn how weak these are. And then we have to move towards setting up a new U.S. Constitution. And this we still use today, where we have different branches of government. We have different powers between the President, Congress, Supreme Court. So we have separation of powers. And where the Enlightenment really has much of its influence is over here in the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. And what this does is guarantees our specific freedoms as citizens of America. So some basic information that we can add to our notes is that the political philosophies of the Enlightenment fueled revolution in the Americas and France. Again, we're going to first see it in America, American Revolution, then we'll see it in the French Revolution, and then we'll see it in the Haitian Revolution, and eventually the Latin American revolutions. And again, we're going to focus on the American Revolution. Again, we have an example that the Declaration of Independence was influenced by the writings of these philosophers, as well as the U.S. Constitution. All right, now we have a nice chart here which gives us some background information. So, we're focusing on how this Enlightenment is going to influence the American Revolution. So what precedes or comes before the Enlightenment? Well, that's the scientific revolution. And what they start doing, these scientists, is they question the church on physical matters, such as the Earth and its orbit, the sun, etc. So we see the heliocentric model coming about that states that the sun is the center of the universe and Earth goes around it. Prior to that, the church would say that the sun revolved around Earth primarily not based on science or reason or logic, but because they felt that since God created Earth, that we must be the most important beings, and therefore everything revolves around us. Now, these ideas are going to influence the Enlightenment, and here they're going to be a little different. Here they're going to question government and politics. Don't forget, we had absolute monarchs during this time. So if we add a little bit to the bottom, this is during absolutism. Eventually, after the American Revolution, we're going to see a Republican government. That doesn't mean Republicans and Democrats that you think of today. It really goes back to ancient Rome and the Republic, where we voted for representatives and you had the Senate. Okay, so now let's break this down a little bit more. Let's look a little bit at geography. So here is where we see through France, Spain, Austria, okay, even Sweden, parts of Russia, St. Petersburg, all of these different centers of thinking, okay? And again, it's going to make its way over to the colonies. We're going to see Boston's going to be a huge hub of knowledge and inquiry, as well as Philadelphia. And we'll talk about those individuals in class a bit more. And this graph over here is pretty cool, this little graphic. It says all the powers of the government in one place, and that's a bad idea. So here I'm just going to put a little symbol. This is absolutism. And maybe if we spelled it right, it'd be helpful. Okay, so we have absolutism. And they're saying this is no good. Okay? A better idea, which comes out from some of the different philosophers, is to separate that power for government into different branches of government. So here is where the idea of 3 branches of government comes from. Okay? Here you're making laws. Here, okay, you're going to judge whether those laws are fair, whether people are acting according to the law, or if their actions violate that. And the executive branch is here you're trying to create organizations and little bodies to enforce those laws. And together the idea, when you have 3 branches of government, is to keep all of the power balanced. Okay. In this part of the notes, we're just going to very briefly look at 10th grade at the Enlightenment Philosophers chart and take a look at all of the different rights that these philosophers believed we as humans should have. So let's take a look and note on some of them. So we just look at Montesquieu's checks and balances, separation of powers. Okay, we have that in our Constitution. Voltaire believed in freedom of speech and in religion. We have that in our Bill of Rights. We have popular sovereignty, the right to govern ourselves. We see that example in the Mayflower Compact. Okay. Mary Wollstonecraft writes very eloquently about women's rights, although it does take a while for the United States to catch up with some of these ideas. And the big one we're going to focus on is Locke. Okay? John Locke is someone you need to know for the Regents, for life, all of that good stuff. So John Locke, his basic argument about humanity and governments is that governments need to protect the life of its citizens. So here we can think about having an army to protect us from invaders, and internally to keep domestic peace, we have a police force. So we have life, liberty, okay, freedom. Some ways that we've interpreted liberty or freedom, okay, is the internet. Now that may sound a little far-fetched, but we have few restrictions in the U.S. on our ability to look up information. Some nations are very, very restrictive, okay, and censor their internet. So we have lots of freedoms. We can start our own business if we get the proper paperwork, okay? So there's a lot of liberty there, as well as we could say the court system, all right? If I want to sue my neighbor because they're building their fence into my property, we have the court system to kind of decide that and keep peace and reduce the amount of violence and chaos in society. And the last thing that Locke talked about was life, liberty, and the government should protect our property. One of the hallmarks of Western civilization is this idea of private property. And there's a lot of debate around that as far as how that made its way into our society and our culture. But we'll kind of look at that throughout the year. That's one that's a little bit tough to kind of nail down in this little summary. So those are the big things. John Locke, life, liberty, and property. All right, again, we have our little timeline here. All right, just looking at how everything is coming back to the Enlightenment. Okay, let's wrap up. Let's take a look here. We have the Enlightenment. Let's write this down on your notes. All right? Now, what was the Enlightenment? So what they did is they questioned the role of government. When was this? This was primarily during the 17th and the 18th centuries. And it occurred in Europe. So here's some basics there. What caused it? Why was there a need on the part of these philosophers to question their government? Well, we had absolutism throughout Europe. All right. Example, we use King Louis XVI during the French Revolution, although that does come after the Enlightenment, but it does show the tyranny that you learned last year, one of the big people you need to know. So now let's just branch this off real quick. The impact of the Enlightenment. Specifically, we're going to look at America. And when we say America, that's just a local term to say the United States, because you can also consider Canada as part of America, Central and South America as well. All right, so when we look at the United States, how have we been influenced? Well, first one is the Declaration of Independence, which we'll look at more closely. All right, we were angry at the Crown of England and their treatment of us. A lot of harassment on the streets of the colonies, as well as economic harassment. So we have the Declaration of Independence. Secondly, we have the U.S. Constitution, which is the framework for the U.S. government. And lastly, we have the Bill of Rights, which are the freedoms that we enjoy.